that, and there wasn't, you didn't keep needing like a flashlight app from the App Store. It was just like part of the OS, and that was like going to happen. And then there were, I think, things like Uber that were enabled by having smartphones, but really built a very defensible long-term business. And I think you just want to go for that latter category.
I can come up with a lot of incumbent businesses that leverage you all that fit that framework in some ways. Are there any like novel types of concepts that you sort of think is in that example, the Uber, and it doesn't need to be, it could be a real company if you think of one, or even if it's a toy or just something that's interesting that you think is like enabled in that way?
I would actually bet on the new companies for like many of these cases. A very common example people use is trying to build like the AI doctor, like the AI diagnostician. And people talk about, oh, well, I don't want to do a startup here because Mayo Clinic or take your pick is going to do it. And I would actually bet it's a new company that does something like that.
Do you have any advice for CEOs beyond that who want to be proactive about preparing for these types of disruptions?
I would say like bet that intelligence as a service gets better and cheaper every year. And it is necessary, but not sufficient for you to win. So the big companies that take, years to implement this, you can like beat them. But every other startup that's paying attention is going to do this too. And so you still have to figure out like what's the long-term defensibility of my business. Now, the playing field is way more open than it's been in a long time. There's incredible new things to do, but you don't get a pass on like the hard work of building enduring value, even though you can now do it in more ways.
Is there a job title or a type of job responsibility that you could envision existing or being mainstream in 5 years because of AI that like is maybe niche or non-existent today?
That's a great question. And I don't think I've ever gotten it before. It's people always ask like, what job is going to go away? The new one is a more interesting question. Let me think for a second. There's like a lot of things that I could talk about that I think are sort of less interesting or less huge. What I'm trying to do is like come up with the areas of like, what will 100 million people do or 50 million people do? The broad category of new kinds of art, entertainment, sort of more like human to human connection. I don't know what that job title is going to be, but I think, and I don't know if this like we get there in 5 years, but I think there's going to be a premium on like human in-person, like fantastic experiences. I don't know what we'll call that, but I could see that being like a very huge category of something new that we do.
The most recent public tender of OpenAI was 90 billion or something in about there. Are there one or two things that you sort of look at as milestones that will get OpenAI to be $1 trillion company, short of AGI?
I think if we can just keep improving our technology at the rate we've been doing it and figuring out how to continue to make good products with it and revenue keeps growing like it's growing. I don't know about specific numbers, but I think we'll be fine.
Is the business monetization model today the one that you think creates the $1 trillion equity value?
I mean, the ChatGPT subscription model like really works well for us. Like surprisingly, I wouldn't have bet on that. I wouldn't have been confident it's going to do as well as it has, but it's been good.
Do you think post AGI, whatever that term actually means, we'll be able to, I don't know, ask AGI what the monetization model is that might be different?
Yeah. Should be able to.
I think we maybe saw in November, not to rehash, that the existing OpenAI structure left some things to be desired, which I don't think we need to rehash in total. You've talked about it enough, I think. But you've spoken to making changes along the way. What do you think the appropriate structure is going forward?
I think we're close to being ready to talk about that. We've been hard at work on all sorts of conversations and brainstorming there. I think like hopefully this year, I think we'll be ready to talk about this calendar year.
You tell me first.
We'll see.
When Larry and Brett Taylor got Battlefield promoted to board directors, I was waiting for, my call never came through, but One of the interesting things I think about preconceptions around AI, to your point on the monetization model and all that, is I think I've heard you speak about it, manual work obviously first, followed by white collar, followed by creative. Obviously, it's proven to be kind of the opposite in some ways. Are there other things that are counterintuitive that you've looked at being like, well, I would have presupposed it to be this way, but it's actually proven to be the exact opposite?
That's definitely the mega surprise to me, the one that you mentioned. There's other, I don't think I would have expected it to be so good at legal work so early, just because I think of that as like a very precise, complex thing. But no, definitely the big one is the observation of like physical labor, cognitive labor, creative labor.
For those that haven't heard you make the point about AGI and why you dislike the term, can you elaborate on that point?
Because I no longer think it's like a moment in time. I obviously have so many naive conceptions when you start any company, and particularly in a field that's like moving around as much as this one is. But my naive conception when we started is that we would like get to a moment where we didn't have AGI and then we did, and it would be a real discontinuity. And I still think there's some chance of a real discontinuity. But on the whole, I think it's going to look much more like a continuous exponential curve where what matters is the pace of progress year over year over year. And you and I will probably not agree on the month or even the year that we're like, okay, now that's AGI. We can come up with other tests that we will agree with, but even that is harder than it sounds. And, GPT-4 is definitely not over a threshold that I think almost anyone would call an AGI, and I don't expect our next big model to be either. But I can imagine that we're like only maybe one or two or some small number of ideas away and a little bit more scale from something where we're like, this is now kind of different. And I think it's important to stay vigilant about that.
Is there a more modern, like Turing test? We can call it the Bartlett test, where that you think like, hey, when it crosses this threshold?
I think when it's capable of doing better research than like all of OpenAI put together, even one OpenAI researcher, that is like a somehow very important thing that feels like it could or maybe even should be a discontinuity.
Does that feel close?
Probably not, but I wouldn't rule it out.
What do you think the biggest obstacles that you see to reaching AGI? It sounds like you think maybe the scaling laws have runway currently and holding for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think the biggest obstacles are new research. And, one of the things I've had to learn shifting from like internet software to AI is research does not kind of work on the same schedule as engineering, which usually means it takes much longer, it doesn't work, but sometimes means it works tremendously faster than anyone could have predicted.
What is that? Can you elaborate on that point, that it's like not as linear in progress?
I think the best way to elaborate on that is like historical examples. I'm going to get the numbers wrong here, but
I'm sure no one will try to correct you on
someone will.
Yeah.
I think the neutron was first theorized in the early 1900s. It was maybe first detected in the 10s or 20s. And the work on what became the atomic bomb started in the 30s and happened in the 40s. Like from not really having no idea that such